Welcome to Know Your Rights, New Jersey. I'm your host, Rhinold Lamar Ponder. Today we're going to discuss a variety of issues regarding the needs of and the services provided to the immigrant community, with a special emphasis on the Latin American or Spanish-speaking community. Today we're fortunate to have with us three guests who are extremely knowledgeable but also very active around these issues. So I'm happy to introduce first John Heilner, the chair of the Immigration Committee of the Princeton Human Services Commission, Louise Sandberg, director of the Latin American Task Force, and volunteer Laura Encinas.
Program director.
Oh, program director.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Program director. Thank you. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you
Good
for
to be
having
here.
us, Rhinold.
So let's open it up with John. John, give us an idea or paint a picture for us of how the changing demographics of the immigration community is now impacting the broader community and how those needs have developed.
Well, the 2010 census showed that the Latino population was up to 8.6% of Princeton's population. And it's possible that Louise and Laura could even give us a breakdown, I'm not sure, of that Latino group. But that percentage has been rising steadily over the years, and it really is now our largest minority, if you will, population. And so the issues that have come to the fore, really, since I've been involved, which is much less than Laura and Louise, have been things like the rash of deportations that took place back around 10 years ago, but even as recently as about a year and a half ago.
All right.
And wage theft, which is an ongoing issue. The need for a quality education, especially higher education. We can get into that if you like.
Absolutely.
And I think Laura and Louise can add to that.
Can you add to that?
Go ahead.
Well, the Latin American Task Force is a network of ladies who have offered their volunteer time, and they had organized many programs many years ago, a couple of which still are functioning today, and Louise has been managing them. One of which is the Ask a Lawyer events, which is where we provide free legal consultations on a quarterly basis at the public library. And then we offer citizenship training classes, so it's preparation for the students to apply or prepare for their interviews, their immigration interviews. And one of the other projects was this brochure, which we put together for
Our
the Hispanic
folleto.
community, which is it's a welcome booklet for the Hispanic community with all kinds of information about, where to find out about schooling or transportation within Princeton, or anyway,
Well,
good source of information.
That's wonderful, and we'll talk a bit more about the services that you provide and the connection between the task force and the commission. I think everyone should know a bit more about that history. But let me back up a little bit and tell us a little bit more about, when I ask about the demographics, what's happening in the community, and why should not only the immigrant community or the Latin American community be concerned, but why should the broader community be concerned about what's happening and the needs that have developed in providing those needs?
Well, we actually see slightly different point of view than what John is saying. 20 years ago, I think there was a huge Latino community here in Princeton, primarily Mexican, with a group of Guatemalans who had come previously.
Right.
And they made up the largest part of the Hispanic community. As those immigrants became a little more secure and they realized what the possibilities were, they've moved out of Princeton. So they've moved into Hillsborough and Lawrenceville and further afield, where they could afford to buy a home or have a bigger home and get their family really solidly grounded. So we've seen a slightly different shift, but there is still the need. And when we do our Ask a Lawyer programs, we have clients who come from everywhere, from Germany, Japan, Korea, huge numbers of Chinese who come to our preparation classes for citizenship. So we see a huge range of immigrants. And yes, I think the Latinos tend to have their own difficulties because they often come in to do the low-level work, and they're economic refugees from their countries. They can't, they're trying to make a life for their families. They're very hard-working, good people, but they're stuck in a bind with our immigration situation in this country. So it's very difficult. So, on the one hand, they are a big block, but that's not who we always see at our programs anymore. When we started these programs, it was the case.
Yeah.
It was totally Latinos.
Can I piggyback?
Sure, please.
So I think it's really important, something that Louise said toward the end of that, is that the folks who really need the most help now are typically very low income. They're very, as she said, they're very hardworking. And a lot of people in Princeton don't appreciate the fact that for various reasons, whether economic or documentation reasons or the broken immigration system that our country has, many of them are, quote, living in the shadows. And this starts a series of problems, which perhaps were not as true 20 years ago. And so these are some of the things that we've been trying to, the Human Services Commission has taken on its plate more recently.
And so why did the committee that you're now the chair of develop? Is that in response to these needs?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, the Latin American Task Force has been doing programs for a long time, but we were beginning to see that, let's talk about deportation. So to make it simple, the Homeland Security Department, after 9/11, decided that they wanted to try to enlist local police forces to help them deport people. I mean, let's just make it as simple as possible.
Under the guise of terrorists.
Exactly,
they might be terrorists.
Yeah, the guy who clawed his way up from Guatemala through Mexico, he's been working here 15 years, he's a terrorist. Well, no, he's not. And so they started really enlisting local police forces to try to help them in their deportation efforts. And this creates a terrible dynamic in the community.
Yes.
Because then that part of the community is afraid to come forward when there are problems, if they're victims of any kind of a crime, if they witness a crime. They just didn't want to talk with the police.
Which is extremely important, not only to that community, but to the broader community.
Absolutely.
Because it makes us, the community, more dysfunctional.
Exactly.
I guess what you're...
Exactly.
Okay.
Right, and there are other ramifications. When there's health issues and they don't come forward, we've had problems with that.
Okay.
Housing issues, it's on a broad scale. So.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's one of the things and I'd like for you to continue, but I really am very interested in the needs that have also popped up out of these changes. But
Okay.
please finish with the deportation.
So on that issue, just to bring it fast forward, if you will, last summer, then acting Chief Sutter, Nick Sutter, of the police force, decided that he would rewrite and clarify the police directive that defined how police officers would interact with the federal agency, ICE, I-C-E, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, I believe. And this is where a lot of the problems had developed. So what he did with some help from the Human Services Commission, from the Latin American Legal Defense and Education Fund, a number of us sat down and looked at the current directive and said, let's see if we can reword it to make it very clear that police officers' role is really one of public safety. It's not to be deportation officers. And he made that very clear last September in a directive to the police force. And then in February and April of this year, every police officer in town was trained in that system by attorney Ryan Lilienthal, who's been dealing in immigration subjects here in town for a long time. And also, we were able to work in some wage theft issues, which we can get to. But the important thing is that every police officer now understands that his role, his or her role, is public safety, not deportation.
So tell us a little bit more about the other needs of the immigrant community, and I recognize you said that it's varied.
Right,
but-
and it is changing. Well, language is obviously a great need. So and when you talk about language, there are intercultural issues that, they may not understand how things work and how to get access and how to find the right person. And that becomes an issue on a daily basis. I mean, you look at the schools. I think Princeton schools are a little better, but in some districts, you have the right to enroll your child in a school despite your legal status in this country. And that does become a huge issue in some districts. I think we're very lucky here in Princeton because we are an educated community. Still, there have been issues, and it's probably not. This is not the place to go into the particular issues, but schooling becomes one. Health issues. I mean, the fact that we used to have a clinic here in town that the community could walk to. And now they have to take a bus. The bus stop is quite a distance from the actual clinic in the hospital. The translation coordinator position has been eliminated. It's not as friendly to the people who need it. So, the clinic, the health issues have become more of an issue. It goes on and on. It goes on and on.
So then what has been the role of the task force and the commission in fulfilling these particular needs, or any of the needs?
Well, we've tried to take on those aspects that we feel we're qualified to do,
Okay.
and that are a small piece that we can actually make a difference. So, we've avoided the legal aspects because
Okay.
we're not attorneys. I mean, as you well know,
Except
you
for
don't,
the Ask a Lawyer program where
But
you
we don't-
enlist attorneys to give advice.
exactly.
Yes.
We don't give the advice. We simply provide the structure for people to come.
Absolutely. So,
Right. So, we've opted out of that. We've made a conscious choice that we don't feel that we're qualified to offer that on a regular basis, but we do what we can. We can do the citizenship preparation, and that's turned out to be a lot of fun for people who are involved. The students love it. They stop us on the streets. They're so excited. It's something
Oh,
that's
really? Why is
very
it so much fun?
positive.
Well, when one of your students who has, come for 8 weeks in a row and struggled and to learn all the different facts and then understand the English language and all how the interview is going to take place and so on, comes back with their diploma, it is like, their lives have changed. The lives
And they can
of
now
their-
bring their mother to this country and their, 21-year-old son, and it's like the doors have opened. This
wow.
really is the promised land, and they've managed it. But
Takes
it's a
hard work.
daunting task. You have to learn the history. You have to understand the 3 parts of the government and how they all interwork. And it's not a simple task. Native Americans, people who have been born in this country, don't even know a lot of the history questions that are expected of these immigrants. So, it's something that we found we could do, and we've been able to do it successfully. We're very proud of it, and we have a lot of fun with it, so that's been fun. Our folleto, which offers information about the community, we've just updated that. It's available online through the library, through the Princeton Services, Human Services, and these are things that were pieces that we felt we could do well. Not that we could just handle, but that we could do well, so we've continued.
Well, I also understand from speaking with John that another major issue, particularly in the Spanish-speaking community, happens to be wage theft. Can you explain a little bit about that to us and why, the
Sure.
significance of that?
Sure. Let me say what it is and then
Please.
throw out an interesting statistic that I looked up specially for this meeting today. So wage theft is when an employee is not paid at all for the time he's worked, or perhaps he or she is paid for fewer hours than they worked. They may not be paid overtime at time and a half, which is regulated and governed by federal and state law.
Right.
They may be charged very high fees for silly things like tools. So if I'm a landscaper, but I don't have my own tools. Maybe I get charged, $20 to use a shovel for the day. I'm just making that up, but it's possible. And let me also stress that really only a small percentage of employers would engage in these practices. I mean, most employers do the right thing. These are all regulations that are governed by federal and state law, the wage and hour laws. They're supposed to provide workman's compensation. That's also regulated by
But there are
state
still
law.
victims, which is a
But
bit
there are
surprising.
victims.
And in very particular areas of employment.
Exactly. So, very interestingly, Seton Hall Law School did a study about 2 years ago in a variety of communities around New Jersey. So this is not just Princeton, but it's a good snapshot of the whole state. And they found of all I think they interviewed about 150 day laborers, especially. And over 50% reported that there had been at least one instance in the last year when they had not been paid properly. So half the workers have experienced wage theft with somebody. 94%, this is an amazing number, 94% reported that they had not been paid overtime, even though they worked more than 40 hours within a week. So, we can just debate the numbers back and forth,
Right,
but clearly
right.
there is a problem. And so what we've done here in Princeton is we've really tried to combine the efforts of the Human Services Commission, the Police Department, and the Latin American Legal Defense and Education Fund.
Okay.
And the three groups have developed a common intake form. And by intake form, I mean the information that you need to process a case. So we're all using the same case.
Excuse
the
me,
same
John,
form.
isn't New Labor also involved in this?
Yes, good point. New Labor is a workers' rights organization that has done work in New Brunswick and Newark, in Edison, I think.
So this is a
Monmouth.
statewide problem, as you indicated,
yeah.
not just a local problem.
Absolutely,
Probably
absolutely.
nationwide.
It's nationwide.
Nationwide?
Definitely.
And so New Labor has also helped. They're a terrific workers' rights organization. But what we did there was we developed this intake form. And so if you're somebody who's a victim of wage theft, you can come. Hopefully you're comfortable with the police now because of all the outreach they've been doing.
I was going to ask, how do you get many people who are probably afraid of the system that,
Right.
that may or may,
Right.
may not have been fair to them, or that may not have been fair to other members of their community, to come forth to protect themselves? How do you?
Well, this is something all of us have been working on. I mean, you guys have been working
Right.
on it for 20 years plus. The police have been very active, our local police force, for over a year, probably a year and a half, and somewhat before that, really reaching out to immigrant communities. For example, they've gone to the Mass at the Spanish Mass at St. Paul's Church.
the police department? has?
Well, a couple of officers.
Well,
who
that's the
speak
police
Spanish.
department.
Right.
Right.
Not the whole department.
That would be rather daunting.
That would be a little scary. And so they've gone to meet with immigrant groups after the Mass,
Right.
along with our Human Services Director, Elisa Nera, who, by the way, is bilingual. She started with the Human Services Department just over a year ago here in Princeton. And so between the police and Elisa, they really have reached out to workers. We've now started going to talk with workers at the places they congregate to get work, especially in front of the bodega and the deli on Witherspoon Street. We've been over there 2 or 3 times already.
Well, and it's using the idea, excuse me, John,
Yes,
of
go ahead.
community policing, where
Yes,
they're on
right.
bicycles, they're walking in the
Right.
neighborhood, they're talking, they're at the schools, they're a presence and they're a known presence so that they're individuals. It's not the police force.
Right.
It's Officer John. And
So they also get to know members of the community individually, so that
Right.
they are not just those people. They are. They
Exactly.
Right,
Right.
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 Intermingle.
So to bring this right up to the moment, this coming Monday, the Princeton Council will hear for the second time a landscaper's ordinance. And the landscaper's ordinance is quite broad. It involves things like picking up brush and leaves and all that. But we were able to work into that, again, with the help of New Labor especially, some wording that that reinforces the state and federal statutes on wage theft and also workmen's compensation. And what the landscapers ordinance will do is if you want to do business in Princeton as a landscaper, you have to register. That's been true in the township for quite some time. Now that we've combined the borough and the township, the new ordinance will govern both. You have to register, you have to acknowledge that you've read and understand the state and federal wage and hour laws. And most importantly, it actually has a section where if you as a landscaping company are shown to not make right on wage theft incidents, you can be barred from registering in Princeton. So that's very good motivation for landscapers, for those few landscapers who are not doing the right thing, to now get their act together and do the right thing.
So is that, and I didn't hear you say this, but does that mean that landscaping is one of the areas where wage theft is most prevalent, and are there any other areas of employment?
Yeah, well, landscaping is one. Restaurants, again, a minority of restaurants, but there are some that don't follow the wage and hour laws. So we're going to be looking for ways, together with the health department, because they're already doing inspections and they have a lot of relationships with restaurants, to educate employers as well as make it very apparent that in Princeton you need to follow the law.
Now, are these problems typically resolved in court, or are there a variety of avenues so that for the victims to resolve these issues?
There are a variety of avenues. It gets complicated, but just to name a few. If the case is large enough, if there's enough money involved, you as a victim might want to enlist a lawyer to help you. And a couple of lawyers in town have been good at doing that. But that can take a very long time. You certainly can file a claim with the New Jersey State Department of Labor under the Wage and Hour Division. Again, it's a good avenue, but it takes a while to resolve. So
I see a little smirk there.
Well, no, it's not a smirk. I'm just thinking taken to on another level. I mean, when we talk about, there are so many areas, and this can go to the other level of human trafficking, which usually are either young people who are very vulnerable or often immigrants. And of course, prostitution comes to mind. But when we talk about other areas, there are domestic servants. I mean, I used to work in Trenton. We would have people who were brought in, and it was really slavery. You know, their passports would be taken. They may or may not have been comfortable in English. They were threatened in multiple ways. You know, there's a case of a woman who worked at a horse ranch up in Kingston area. You know, there are so many different things. In South Jersey, it's the agricultural workers. You know, the immigrants are taken advantage of in many ways. And the Attorney General's office is very aware of some of these cases. And there's been some in Princeton. The cases that have come through the task force through Ask a Lawyer, we've had some violence against women clients. So these women marry men who promise them that they will be, you know, it's gonna be a real marriage, and they're gonna get their green card, and, you know, we're gonna have a life. And then, you know, the guy turns out not to be such a nice man. Once in a while, it's the man who's victimized, but it's usually the woman. And they come to us with tales of abuse and their passport being confiscated. And there is a lot going on that most people in Princeton are totally unaware of.
Yeah, that's a good point. But to go back to your question,
Thank
just
you.
to finish out the avenues. So we've got the attorney you can hire, the State Department of Labor, but really one of the most effective means of resolving the wage theft issue is through this sort of tripartite group of the Police Department, Human Services, and Latin American Defense and Education Fund. And that's an informal process where one of the people from those three groups will go talk with the employer and really take the facts to them and just make it clear that we'd like to resolve the case, we'd like to get it done, we don't want you to be doing that anymore, and if we can resolve it, then we don't need to bump it up to state court or the Department of Labor.
Now,
And
Laura,
that's been very effective.
I'm sorry. You wanted to add. You sounded as though you wanted to add something
No,
to
I
that.
was just going to say that, the mediation
Yes,
is
mediation.
perhaps the best means of resolving this, rather than taking it through these legal channels that are very lengthy and expensive and so on. So we found that by trying to mediate the cases, we've had better results. Yeah.
Now, can you share with us how members of the immigrant community can get in touch with you for your for your different services, or to learn more about what it is that you do and how to learn more about how they can protect themselves? I guess
Okay.
we'll start with John.
Human Services
All right.
Commission.
So the Human Services, actually the Human Services, the Director of Human Services,
Mhm.
whose phone number I stupidly forgot to bring with me.
Well, we'll
Is it in
take
here?
care of that, and we'll put it
Here
at the
it
end
is.
of the show.
It's right in the letter. Okay, so you can contact Elisa Nera, who's the Director of Human Services, and her phone number is 609-688-2055. That's one way. Another way would be to go to the police, who you now have a better relationship with, and talk with them, or the Latin American Legal Defense and Education Fund, or your task force, I'm sure.
Well, our task force is really not, since it's a network of volunteers, we really are working through the library, and the library knows which of us to contact for a particular question, which is how you found us.
Yes, and I must admit I was disappointed in and how difficult it was to get in touch
But
with
I think you understand now why we all have our other lives.
I do
and
understand you all have absolutely. But I do believe that it probably can be, I was concerned about how difficult it was to get you, so I wondered for the Ask a Lawyer program. And so I wondered if other members of the community had that kind of difficulty.
I have no idea. I mean,
Because you do such great work.
we do it
and
quarterly on a fairly, regular basis, and it appears in the library's, roster of events.
It's
and
advertised in
Yeah.
local media here and
Yes.
in Trenton.
In the
It's
newspapers.
advertised online, so I'm sorry it was difficult, but we're just reluctant to be an individual in that, individuals move on and change, and the
Right.
group has been around a long time, so we'd
You
rather
have.
be
You-
the group.
You've been doing the Ask a Lawyer program for over 10 years.
15
right?
years.
Fif-
This
for
year is
15 years.
15
What
years.
drove you passion drove you to do this?
Well, I'm an educator. I teach English as a second language to adults. I've been doing that. I started with the influx of the Russians back in the 80s, and when we moved here, it was the Latino community, and you hear about their needs, you hear about their problems as they're trying to integrate and make a life here, and you search for answers. And this was a program that grew out of a need, and it's continued.
Well, we're very appreciative, and I am extremely grateful that you all came here today to share this information. And I will advocate a little bit more for easier accessibility because you are doing such fantastic and such necessary work for the community. And I think it's amazing that people are now less afraid to come out and receive the services they deserve. So with that, thank you very much for joining us. And I'd like to thank our audience for joining us. And until the next episode, be well. Thank you.